a little bit after I graduated, there was a pretty big geopolitical happening, which is Jimmy Carter allowed in the Marielitos, the Cuban boat lift of the 80s. And suddenly, guess what happened? Minnesota was filled with Cuban refugees, and nobody knew what the heck to do with them. But I knew a fair amount about Cuba. I had done a number of research pieces on the culture and social impact of communism in Cuba, and ended up getting a job as a social worker. Never took a social work class, but what I knew is I spoke Spanish, and I knew something about Cuba and about the experience that all these families and individuals were coming to Minnesota with. What were their life experiences? And so I joined an organization, and again, just learned a ton about what social work was. I didn't really even know what social work was, and but worked for an organization and gained a lot of experience there. And from that experience, I think I was very early. I was, in my mid-20s, working with Cuban refugees. And at that time, the Cuban refugees were all Afro-Caribs. And coming to Minnesota as an Afro-Carib person, they were completely persona non grata in Minnesota. The Cubans that were settled here were Cuban refugees that had fled Cuba when Castro came in '59. And that was the very elite and wealthy. They were of Spanish descent. They wanted nothing to do with these very poor African-descended Cubans. So the Cubans wanted nothing to do with them. The African American communities in Minnesota wanted nothing to do with them. They didn't speak Spanish. They saw no alignment with them. They wanted nothing to do with them. And the white community in Minnesota wanted nothing to do. They were black. They didn't speak English. My God, they were from Cuba. And there were all sorts of issues saying these were mentally ill people, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of racism involved in that. And so I just mention that because when I say I learned a lot about social work, it wasn't just learning about what people need and about the services you offer them. When you're an interpreter, which I was for all of my clients, you're kind of like a microphone that people forget you're there sometime. That was as a white middle class American. It was the first time in my life that I had ever experienced racism firsthand. And what I remember as a young person growing up, I always heard about institutionalized racism. I thought that was something that really occurred in the southern part of the United States. I guess in my mind, I was thinking of kind of white sheets in the KKK. I really always thought of Minnesota as very progressive. I think I hung out with people that were progressive thinkers. So I didn't think we really had those issues up here until this job.